you get down to your hemming options, you know you're nearing the end of your project. Hi everyone, I'm Glenda with SureFit Designs, whimsically called Glenda the Good Stitch. In this Make It Sew beginner sewing series, the next thing I am going to talk about is hemming options. Of course you want the hem to look as professional as the rest of the garment, and depending on the fabric choice that you've chosen for your project, that's going to determine what kind of a hem technique that you use. And so rather than showing you just one hemming technique, I'm going to show you a variety of different choices. So let's take a look at the blouse that I have been sewing on. It's time to put the hem in. And you'll see that what I have done is I have serged the lower edge. You may or may not have a serger, and that's fine. I'll talk about options if you don't have a serger. But in this particular example, what I am going to do is I've planned an 1.5 inch hem allowance to be turned up like that. And you could, I suppose, just take this front facing the center front portion of it and just turn it up like this on the inside. But that's going to create some bulk, and it's definitely going to be bulky on the front edge of your seam allowance right there at center front. So I'm going to show you a little technique for making this all nice and neat in the corner. What you will do is take the facing, that of course is now to the inside, you're going to take it and fold it to the outside like this, so that we now have right sides together. And you want to make sure that the seam allowance where you sewed the facing in place is exactly rolled on the edge of that seam allowance. Then I'm going to put in a couple of pins in this fashion, and then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew across right here at 1.5 inches deep. And because on my sewing machine I don't have a seam gauge that is at 1.5 inches wide, you can see that I've put on a piece of blue painter's tape. So that's going to be my guide for stitching this turn back right here. And because it is a finished edge, I'm going to backstitch, and I put my needle in the down position. You don't really need it because I'm just doing a short line of stitching here. So I'm running that raw edge right along the edge of the tape so that I make sure that I'm at 1.5 inches wide. Then I will backstitch at that end as well. And we'll just clip this. So now what we want to do is turn this to the right side. But before I can do that, I need to trim this excess bulk away. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to trim across like this, and I only want to trim. I accidentally started cutting both the fabric and the facing, and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to stop with the garment and I'm going to trim like this. And that could have been a mistake if I'd have kept on going, but I'm just going to trim it off like that because I really wanted to get rid of the bulk anyway. And then right here I'm going to do one more clip like this, and then I'm going to take it down again. So what I'm doing is I'm grading the bulk out of the edge. My scissors, my shears are catching there. And so now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it all to the right side. And to make sure that I've got the perfect point, I'm using my point turner, which I've shown you in previous lessons. I'm just going to push that point out. And now what has happened is that it's turned that facing beautifully to the inside, and when I start turning up the rest of the hem like this, it's all going to be beautiful and neat. The bulk has been trimmed away and the front looks lovely. So what kind of a hemming process would I use for this blouse? Well, I would likely use a fusible web like Stitch Witchery. And I've got a couple of options here to show you. So let's take a look at the samples now. These first two discuss the bonding process. This one has used a product called Heat and Bond. And with any project, it's always a very, very wise idea to test the product on a scrap of fabric first of all, because as I put the Heat and Bond in here, I think you can see this in the camera. You can see that it kind of melted all the way through to the inside and also on the right side. And I specifically didn't press it the rest of the way, and you can see the difference in the tones of the fabric. And as I open this up, there's that little bit of Heat and Bond that's left. So always a good idea to test. And this is one of these fusible processes actually. And the one that I actually have done that I like, this is called Stitch Witchery. It is just a mesh, kind of like a spider web, and it bonds the two edges of the fabric together. So when I look on the inside of this, here's my little bit of Stitch Witchery, and this is a 1/2 inch wide roll. It might be 5/8, but be that as it may, I take it to my cutting board and I just cut it down in half, because you really only need a very narrow strip of this bonding web in order to get a nice bond here. So you lay it down in between, you put the edge of your hem, in this case I have serged it, and you lay it right over top of the bonding material, and then you're going to press down really hard with steam, and don't iron back and forth, because you want it just a nice pressure on there. And when I turn that over to the right side, you can't see it. It didn't melt through. So to finish off that blouse, that is the process that I'm going to use, is the Stitch Witchery. But let's assume that you don't have a serger. What are some of your other options for doing that blouse? Well, this particular technique is just a narrow hem, and of course I've used a contrasting color. You likely wouldn't do that unless you intentionally wanted a contrasting color for your hem level. On the inside, what I've done is I've turned it once towards the inside and then a second time, so that that is a completely finished edge. I'll just use the other edge to show you. You would turn it once to eliminate the raw edge, and then turn it again. That's just a narrow stitched hem. And on some projects, that'll be a very acceptable hem. On this one is a hand stitching technique. Now for this one, this is called a blind hem stitching technique, is what I've used in here. I use the pinking shears, which give you that zigzag edge, which you're seeing right here. And then after you have pinked the edge of your hem allowance, I did take it to the machine and I put a row of machine stitching very close to the pinking, and then I pressed up the depth of my hem, and then on the inside is where I have done the blind stitch. And so as we take a look at the inside here, again I've used a contrasting color of thread so that you can see this, and I'll show you how to stitch this. I'll just put this finger guard on, and I've got my thread all ready to go here. So what you do for a blind stitch is you pick up a little fiber of the thread like this, and then you come over to the actual garment side and you pick up 1 or 2 fibers of the garment, and you just go back and forth. And you do want to kind of gauge how far apart your stitches are. Usually between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch is about perfect for doing a hand hem. And so when we take a look at the inside, that's what it would look like. When we take a look at the right side, you see all these tiny little picked stitches, and mine are about 1/4 of an inch apart. And of course, when you're using the same color thread, those little stitches are just going to kind of meld all into the entire process. So that's a blind hem stitch. Here's another one that is another process, and I stitch it in a similar fashion, but it's really, I've prepared the hem edge differently. And for this one, what I did was I sewed a line of machine stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge of the hem. And this would be an instance where perhaps you don't have pinking shears. And so the line of machine stitching goes in, that tiny little narrow piece there gets folded to the inside, and then you turn up your hem the distance that you want it to be. And now all that I would do with this is, with the bulk of the fabric on my left-hand side, I would hold it in my fingers like this, and I would fold the hem back over top of itself and over top of my finger, and then I am going to just pick up, again, 2 or 3 fibers of the garment side, and then I would go into the thread that was my turning thread, like this. So again, it's kind of like a back and forth motion. There are other ways of hand hemming, and again, it depends on your fabric, but these are 2 options for you that are relatively easy to do. And again, if you don't have a serger, they certainly are good alternatives. And I've gotten a little bit of a knot in my thread, and so I'd have to stop and pick that out. And there it goes. And that does happen with hand hemming. And again, you get these beautifully hand-picked stitches that are about 1/4 of an inch apart, and when it's done with the same color of thread, it will look lovely. And of course, there is one other option for hemming that I do like, and it's with my new cover stitch machine. Lots and lots of folks don't have cover stitch machines, but I did want to show this to you. With a cover stitch machine, you will end up with either 2 threads or 3 threads that on the inside are going to give you this herringbone pattern that completely cover up that raw edge. Some of you may have already watched my other videos on the cover stitch machine. There's a little series of 3 of them. You'll find them in the Sure-Fit Designs Learning Center in the cover stitch directory. And I know that when you get into the Learning Center, you'll be able to scroll down through the various departments and find the general sewing techniques where you will see how to do the cover stitch. But that gives you some options for hemming. Again, it does depend whether your fabric is a knit or a woven, and of course on the equipment that you have. If you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have, and if you're not already a member of the Sure-Fit Designs community, I do invite you to join, and you can do that in 3 easy steps. While you're in the Sure-Fit Designs Learning Center, make sure that you sign up for the Sure-Fit Designs newsletter, and you're going to find the sign-up form on the bottom of most of the pages in there. And number 2, if you're watching this video in YouTube, at the bottom there'll be like buttons and subscribe buttons. I certainly ask that you to participate in our YouTube channel. It's Sure-Fit Designs. And lastly, we now have a Facebook group page, and people, seamstresses from all over the world, are interacting with one another, asking questions and showing their project work that they've done with Sure-Fit Designs. And please make sure you join us there. It's simply Sure-Fit Designs, it's Facebook.com/groups/Sure-Fit Designs. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you the next time.